one of the first things Zohran Mamdani did was go to neighborhoods and districts where Donald Trump had won elections and ask voters, why did you vote for Donald Trump? And over again, one of the reasons was affordability and a loss in trust in politics. And Zoran had a laser focus on affordability. He knew that that is what brought New Yorkers together, despite different backgrounds, despite different political affiliations, that really focusing on making New York City affordable was what differentiated us not just from Republican candidates, but from Democrat Party candidates that have really pushed the working class under the bus. And it was almost comical how much they wanted him to talk about Israel and, force him into this is what you do when you run on the Democrat Party line. Like, you have to prioritize Israel. And he was very clear that he just didn't have any interest in following that unwritten rule, and that he was going to stay clear or true to his principles.
There was one Instagram post of this guy, and he was like walking through New York City, and he's like, I am a billionaire. I love this city. My grandkids are gonna grow up here. Why would I not want Zohran Mamdani to win? I want a better New York for everybody.
Could you introduce yourself very briefly?
Yeah, my name is Lala Peñaranda. I am a socialist feminist from Colombia, living in New York City. I'm a member of NYC DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, and I'm the Latin America coordinator at Trade Unions for Energy Democracy and a proud member of the PSC union.
My name is Irene Hongping Shen, and I am at heart an organizer, a feminist organizer. Yeah, and also an activist, but an organizer first. I am the lead organizer at Trade Unions for Energy Democracy and also coordinate the Women's Project in TUED. And I am a member of the Professional Staff Congress, CUNY, as well. That's good.
Okay, it's very good to have you here. I will start with the first question. It is some weeks ago, the socialist Zohran Mamdani was elected as mayor of New York. Congratulations from my side. You were activists in the Mamdani campaign. How surprising was the result for you?
Do you want to start, Lala? Or we figured we could
Do you want to
alternate
go ahead and
starting.
yeah, we can. Okay. Sure. I'll kick this one off. So thank you for this interview. The June 24th primary election results were surprising to me. The general election results of November 4th were less surprising. We expected to win, and the question was really by what margin were we going to win in November? And I think, as a DSA NYC member, our desire was to have over 50% of the total votes in the general election in November. And we accomplished that by a small margin, but we accomplished that. Polls were estimating that he was going to win by 46% of the vote, just a few weeks leading up to the November elections. And we secured at least 4 percentage points more than that. And I think that was due largely to the fact that we were able to swing voters who had voted for Cuomo in the primary elections to vote for Zohran Mamdani. And the general idea behind this let's get over 50, which we kept telling people, when we were door knocking, was that we want a popular mandate. We want a mandate that will overwhelmingly give him the support needed from day one to start with implementing an ambitious agenda. And yeah, ultimately we got 50.4% of the vote, more than 1 million votes, 1,036,000. And it was one of the elections with the highest voter turnout in New York City history.
Irene, will you add something?
Yeah, sure. Let's see. So I guess I'm not a DSA member, and so I didn't have the sort of I don't know, inside view of the campaign, or yeah, parts of the campaign, I guess. But I think similar to what Lala's saying, when I started canvassing, it was early in the year. It was probably maybe February, and no one, first of all, no one was out canvassing for any candidate. No one was even thinking about the mayoral election. And no one had heard of Zoran, really. And so it was sort of like, this is a long shot, but let's go for it, because like there's no other option. Like, Trump had come into office already, and everything was just like a shit show. And it was like, personally, I felt like I need to do something, and I'm gonna look for the candidate that, like, we need a win, and I need to find someone who I feel comfortable backing. And I had contact with Mamdani before, and so his campaign looked solid to me, but really no one had heard about this guy at all. And so what was pretty incredible to me was the shift that took place from canvassing in February, and then I took a break because of health reasons. But when I came back closer to the election, so many more people had heard about him, like, and so many more people were enthusiastic. And to see in, a shift of 3 months or so, the kind of momentum that had built was really incredible to me. That I hadn't expected that level of change in such a short amount of time. So, and similarly, yeah, in the primaries, I was not, I was really hopeful, but I wasn't sure. And we definitely, when canvassing, encountered people who were not supportive. But in the general election, there was so much more enthusiasm, and literally every single door I knocked on, I don't think there was maybe there was one person um, that had like strong feelings against him, and it was around the Israel issues. But otherwise, people were either like willing to listen or were already in full support behind him, and so that was pretty exciting. And I think, um, yeah, kind of, you could see the writing on the wall in terms of what was going to happen in the general election, and there was the question about the 50%. And yeah, we did it, which was pretty. That was pretty exciting, that moment when we saw the the percentages change.
Okay, it sounds really cool. It sounds like an atmosphere of change in New York. That's really interesting. Could you explain who exactly voted for Mondami?
Yeah, you know what? I took a screenshot of there's a here, let me see if I can, this might be helpful to share. What was interesting to me was that there was uh all of the categories of people of color, that constituency group. There was a higher turnout for Mamdani than for Cuomo, and that was pretty exciting. And then also low income and middle income people um, voted more for Mamdani than Cuomo or Silva. So that was pretty exciting. Let me share this. Um, yeah, so this is from the New York Times, and you can see that mostly white residents actually voted for Cuomo, and then Hispanic 57, Black residents 61. And this was a big question, especially in the primary, whether Black voters were going to turn out for um, Mamdani or for Cuomo, because there, when in the early days of canvassing, I definitely felt like the older Black community was pro Cuomo. And I think there was a familiarity. He was a Democrat. He had served as the governor. And while there were a lot of accusations, not only about the sexual harassment and his predatory behavior, but also the problems with the nursing home issues in during COVID. And so, but despite that, there seemed to be sort of like I know Cuomo, so I'm going to vote for him, that sentiment. And that really shifted, and I think it was a reflection of what the campaign did strategically, thoughtfully, and also what Mamdani is able to communicate. So yeah, it was interesting for me to see that 61% Asian residents. And I thought of the, excuse me, of the people of color, the Asian residents were the ones that came out most strongly for Cuomo, but still a higher percentage for Mamdani in the end. And then in terms of income breakdown, it was higher income residents for Cuomo, and then lower income residents and middle income residents for Mamdani. And I think the middle income residents for Mamdani was like, that's what I expected, but lower income residents, I wasn't quite sure, and was really pleased to see that there was a more higher percentage for Mamdani.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the basics is that so who voted for Mamdani? We won over 50% in the general. Cuomo got 41, and Curtis Silva, who interestingly did not have the Republican backing or Trump's backing, got 7. And if you look at it by borough, like Irene just showed, Mamdani won in 4 of the city's 5 boroughs. And he performed best in Brooklyn, which was considered his stronghold. In DSA, NYC, we call this large section of um, Brooklyn, the Commie Corridor, where a lot of young people live who consider themselves anti-capitalists. And in that area, in Brooklyn in general, actually, he got 57% of the vote, which is just a massive amount of representation. And then, but interestingly, in the Bronx and in Manhattan, he also got over 50%. So it was really just Staten Island that he lost to Cuomo and not by that large a margin. And then in terms of the party breakdown, it's really interesting because this election had 2 Democrats on the ballot, which for a general election is extremely rare. Of course, Cuomo, a Democrat, ran as an independent, but I think what it tells us is that this was an election also for kind of the soul of the Democratic Party. And the results are that Mamdani captured 60% of voters who backed Kamala Harris in the previous 2024 presidential election, and 36% went to Cuomo. And so this highlights, I think, a split in the Democratic Party between, it's more progressive left-wing voters and it's more establishment moderate voters. And if you look at that breakdown further by age, it's overwhelming that the future of the Democrat Party is more progressive, and you could really make the argument that there is a future for possibly a workers' party, because I think many socialists like myself who register as Democratic voters are so disillusioned with the Democratic Party. We want to see a workers' party. We want to see a different kind of politics altogether. And we know that the Democrat Party is just another capitalist party with just different sponsors than that of the Republican Party. And then by race, Irene did broke that down, and yeah, overwhelmingly, Mamdani won in the city's most diverse neighborhoods, and Cuomo won in predominantly white areas, and that's a really clear divide. And then by age, again, Mamdani won by 62% of New Yorkers under 30, and then more than 50% aged between 30 and 44. So this was a generational vote. And I think it bodes really well for the future of New York. Yeah.
So let's maybe zoom to the social backgrounds or the social reasons of Mamdani's victory. So for us in Europe, New York is the heart of capitalism, actually. And so when a socialist wins the election here, it's something special and points to very serious social problems. I'd like to know how are working class people doing in New York? What are the social reasons for them to vote for Mamdani?
So the short answer is that working class people are being driven out of New York City because of the cost of living crisis. Um, Many times throughout the campaign, when the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, stood at the podium to speak in Zohran rallies, she was met with mass chanting of tax the rich, tax the rich, tax the rich. And I think, you know, anecdotally, for anyone that lives in New York City, it's clear that there is a crisis. There's a cost of living crisis, a mental health crisis, a healthcare crisis. We see it every single day on the subway platforms, on the streets, and when our rent comes in. Um, we see, in um, like outside of the official statistics, some of which I'll share in a second, you see, for example, um, informal living arrangements like 10 workers to a room and apartment units being split by, like sort of like informal walls and housing structures, which are incredibly dangerous and fire hazards. And so, I think anybody who lives in New York with their feet on the ground sees this day to day. But in official statistics, there's lots of reports, but one recently by the University of Columbia in New York shared that New Yorkers in poverty was nearly doubled the national average, and had increased by 7 percentage points in over the past 2 years. So it's not only a really horrific situation, but the tendency is getting worse. And the main driver behind these figures of poverty are the scarcity of housing and the rising cost of housing. Um, and a lot of the people surveyed who were below the poverty line were either working or looking for a job. So it's a lot of New Yorkers that, many who have not just one job, two jobs, but still are literally homeless and on food stamps, etc. Um, I think it's these statistics are like especially damning when you look at how they impact New York youth. So for the 10th year in a row in 2025, more than 100,000 students experienced homelessness in New York City. And for the first time in history, it toppled 150,000 since record keeping. So that means that nearly 1 in 7 public school kids in New York City are homeless, which is just baffling in, as you said, the heart of capitalism. Um, and I think the last thing I'll say is, for people in my generation who kind of were politicized during Occupy Wall Street, which pointed to inequality as the main source of violence, structural violence in US society. Afterwards came uh, the 2016 Bernie elections, the 2020 Bernie elections, the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests, Palestine. And so Zoran comes, from this tradition. He's my age, and, he grew up in New York City, and he's been seeing all these major events that one point to inequality and then try to point to like a structural answer to it. And also, in the case of Black Lives Matter, how profoundly racist and based on white supremacy this inequality is. And so I think Zoran's, you know, focus on affordability really comes from that timeline of political events.
So could you tell us more about the focal points, the issues of the campaign? So I guess housing was a big issue in the campaign, but what themes, what issues were also part of the campaign?
So he ran on four main pillars, and they all were very strategic in terms of how they targeted issues of affordability. The one that I think, you're referencing, and I think many people heard about around the world because it shook the core of capital, was about housing. Um, because, I mean, the trend in New York City over the last, I don't know, 15 to 20 years in particular has been about development. There are so many luxury high rises going up, so many neighborhoods getting demolished, people getting displaced, and gentrification taking over. And many of the, when de Blasio came into office, I can't remember how many years ago now, 10 years ago or so. Anyways, he was a progressive mayor and everybody was hopeful about him. But during that time, I was working on anti-displacement campaigns, and he actually ushered in a lot of zoning that enabled, well, basically, he continued the zoning of neighborhoods for high rises and for luxury developers to come in and build, 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 and then not fill those apartments. And there is always like, yes, we're going to have some affordable units there, but the way they calculated affordability was taking the average income from very rich communities, from the five boroughs, but also from very rich communities in Westchester, which really skewed the results of what affordability was in terms of housing. And the percentages that were affordable units were so minimal, right? So this has been a trend that's been building for years and years and years. And there's been lots and lots of work against, we called it anti-displacement work, and that, but, generally it was sort of, I think, in the more like sort of mainstream narrative, like anti-gentrification. But really, housing was a huge piece of it, right? It was a critical piece of it. Um, and it's a workers issue, which people don't often think about, but it's a workers issue because you live in the place you work, it's part of your community, it's all sort of um, all those pieces tie together. And um, and so I think the issue of affordable housing was something that scared capitalists and scared the ultra wealthy in New York that was making money and is making money off of development and housing. Um, and that became, I think, a topic that was really discussed and raised among, when you canvass, when you talk to people, that was an issue that came up. But also, three of the other really key campaign issues was universal childcare, um, and um, and they really were good about communicating the links between um, working people having to decide between going to work and taking care of their child because there wasn't affordable childcare, and that was obviously gonna drive people out of the city because they couldn't stay if they were going to raise a family here. But also fast and free buses, which was transportation, which for us obviously is a environmental issue, and they could make the links with climate. But also the fact that, like, if you're trying to get to work on time, you have kids, you have whatever you need to take care of, and you can't get there dependably, then that's a problem. And so this is an issue that, because millions of people in the city use public transit, this is going to be something that talks to them, right? And he actually ran a pilot, um, where they did a pilot of a fast and free bus. I think maybe actually Lala probably knows more about this, but like I think 2 lines, and it was very successful. It actually helped more people use public transit, and it was free. And that's, you know, hello, that was like an obvious thing. And what a brilliant idea. And why hasn't anybody really promoted this, right? So that was another, and they had great, fast and free buses. It's like easy to say, you get the idea and you can like spit it out, so it's like a good talking point. And then the last was affordable grocery stores, because the rise of cost of groceries was hitting everybody. And to build sort of public infrastructure so you could have grocery stores where I think, he talked about um, building those grocery stores on public land and using, I think, maybe public procurement for the groceries to bring the cost down, cutting out some of the middlemen. And there was like real thought behind some of these issues that were getting challenged during the campaign. And so, yeah, I think that also spoke to people. And so those 4 issues really, like, who in their right mind wouldn't be backing these issues, right? Like, and the fact that those issues would speak to so many millions of New Yorkers, I think really helped to usher in both the ideas and the thought that like the government could actually take a big role in providing these services, and I think helped shift. If you're not super politically engaged on a day-to-day level, you're starting to those ideas are percolating in your mind, right? Like, oh, that this could be a public service that I could benefit from, and that seems like the right thing, and that a mayor could actually come in and like support these efforts, and it doesn't come out of my pocket, but it's a city infrastructural policy change that then supports millions of New Yorkers, and I think that helps people um, subscribe to socialist ideas, a different kind of ideology than the ones that have been imposed on them, even if they weren't sort of like necessarily actively engaged on, whether I'm a capitalist or I, subscribe to like socialist ideology. It kind of just like naturally helps to expose people to new ideas and ideas that work for the larger public. So, yeah.
I'd like to learn more about the campaign in practical terms. So we spoke about the atmosphere, we spoke about the focal points, but um, if I understand it correctly, so housing issues played a key role in the campaign. And how was the campaign structured around this issue in practical terms?
Sure. Let me first talk about just the campaign and the question about how, Mamdani, you know, uh, differentiated himself from competitors, and then maybe we can get into housing as one example of that. Um, so I think not just because I'm a DSA member, but I genuinely think that there would be no Zohran Mamdani without DSA, and there would be no Zohran as mayor without DSA. And there are other really important groups that came into the campaign very early on. But it's, Zoran himself has said that he wouldn't have run without the endorsement of DSA, both for his assembly member seat and also now for mayor. And I think it's important to talk about that process, how DSA has come to elect 11 officials, socialist officials, to different New York positions. And I think that Germany or, other countries can definitely, emulate the plan or the, apply some of the lessons learned from New York City. The NYC DSA endorsement process is extremely grueling. Like it's very thorough. Basically, there's like an electoral working group in the New York City DSA. And there's the first step is just to like identify candidates that are representative of New York City, that are working class, people of color, represent their neighborhoods, understand um, working class struggles. And those candidates are identified. Then the working group decides sort of who of those initial people moves forward. And then there's a candidate questionnaire, which is a really important part of the process. And Zohran, of course, was subjected to it, just like any other candidate. And so the questionnaires are about socialist ideology. It's, really how would you respond to this crisis or that one or this issue? What do you think about policing, immigration, taxing the rich? And then the candidates answer the questionnaires, and there's a forum, which is citywide, and only DSA members can attend. And there's some qualifications for who is considered a member. They have to have participated in electoral actions. And then anyone who RSVPs, members who RSVP to the forum get to vote. And so it's an extremely democratic process. The questionnaire that candidates have answered beforehand is sent around before the forum. And so everybody has a chance to educate themselves, to really, have answers that speak to a socialist ideology, and then ask clarifying questions in the forum. And then if in the forum a candidate gets over 60%, that's considered a recommendation for a candidate, and then it goes to the branches. So there's different branches within New York City DSA. And then ultimately the leadership committee is the one that finally does the final endorsement. So it is both top bottom and profoundly democratic. And I think that that combination is really powerful. There's so many like areas where as a just rank and file DSA member, I can input, I can influence the questionnaires, I can ask clarifying questions, etc. And I think that's really important. Um, DSA has now run so many campaigns, some of which we've lost, some of which we've won, but that really highlight that strategy and structure is extremely important for running a campaign. And one of those issues, or one of the elements of strategy in particular, is being able to own the data of the campaigns we do. So, for example, the field leader for the Zohran Mamdani campaign was trained initially, like in, like the Obama campaign, for example. And she says that she was really surprised that after those campaigns, the people who did the work didn't own the data of all the door knocking, all the phone calling that they did, where you have extremely valuable information about what voters care about, why they don't want a candidate, what their concerns are, if they're single issue voters, etc. And so DSA has prioritized owning electoral data to run campaigns and having internal analysis, not just relying on polls. So that's really important. And then also, from the Bernie campaign, I think my entire generation learned that you need sustained socialist organizing. Like it's not enough to have campaigns mobilize people and then disappear, but that actually has to be organizations year round, year after year, decade after decade, to sustain the work and plug into campaigns, but then like go back to, the union building, public housing, immigration, police violence, etc., and continue to organize year round. And so that's what it means to concretely like build power in DSA. And I'm convinced that there would be no Zohran Mamdani without that day-to-day work that DSA has done and other organizations. And then I think Zohran won. One of the reasons Zohran won is because, as Irene said, the campaign knew about scale and they knew about timing. And so they had extremely ambitious door knocking goals from the beginning. like, we're going to knock 1 million doors. We're going to do it. We can do it because we've run the numbers from previous campaigns. And we're going to start extremely early on, not wait for the, electoral timeline to tell us, okay, now we talk about the elections, but to really politicize from when Zohran Mamdani only had 1% name recognition in the city, and to start then. And it's extremely, I'll just finish with this, it's extremely important that one of the first things Zohran Mamdani did was go to neighborhoods and districts where Donald Trump had won elections and ask voters, why did you vote for Donald Trump? And over and over and over again, one of the reasons was affordability and a loss in trust in politics. And Zoran had a laser focus on affordability. He knew that that is what brought New Yorkers together, despite different backgrounds, despite different political affiliations, that really focusing on making New York City affordable was what differentiated us not just from Republican candidates, but from Democrat Party candidates that have really pushed the working class under the bus. And so I think that's, those are really important elements of the Zohran Mamdani campaign. And just to say, he didn't push any group under the bus. One day he was at a mosque or at a taxi hunger strike, or at a trans rights rally or at an immigrants' rights rally to abolish ICE. And it was really like the that diversity of what New York City is represented in his issues and in struggles on the street that he physically put his body on the line for. And I think it shows that, yeah, you really don't have to push anyone under the bus, including Palestinians, just to win votes. And he demonstrated that that's possible. And I think that was one of the things that really differentiated his campaign from others. And then, yeah, on housing, there's a lot to say, and it's, I think, telling that in his first 5 days in office, some of his executive uh, um, orders have been focused on housing, on really like speeding the process of like timely production and availability of affording housing units. So creating task forces that identify where there are roadblocks, where there are bottlenecks, and really pushing for policies and procedures both pre and post construction that can speed up approvals, and project financing and project marketing. And so just getting into like the nitty gritty immediately. And he appointed a DSA member, Sia Weaver, who's a longtime tenant organizer, to be the director of the mayor's office to protect tenants. And so, he said in his inauguration speech, I was elected as a Democratic Socialist and I'm going to govern as a Democratic Socialist. And I think a big part of that is putting people like Sia Weaver, putting DSA members in the directing seat of these offices, and having socialist answers to problems of capital of greed, of landlord greed, abuse, that I think for too long has just been normalized. But I think it's telling that he started his first 5 days in office with these, getting into the weeds of how to make the promise of affordable housing real. And yeah, Irene, I mean, there's a lot more to say about housing, so I don't know if you want to continue with that or.
No, I think you captured it greatly.
So let's stay maybe at the structural things for a while, for a second, because in the German left, so we are strongly inspired by Mamdani's victory and Mamdani's campaign, and the German left is trying to learn from this victory, especially to integrate the technical elements into the current campaigns we have in the moment. What I want to know from you is can such a campaign be easily transferred, or is it more? So it is. I understood it is not only a structural thing to win the election in New York. It's also um, there are additional factors, additional things, because we have the structural campaign and we have the tradition, we have the atmosphere, we have the problems, the social problems. So, what would you say? What things we can the German left can copy, and what things are, yeah, what they are.
I don't know actually if you think this is copyable or not, but I think the thing that Lala was talking about, which I think is the most profound of this campaign, is the decades of organizing that have gone on to allow the conditions for this moment to happen. It didn't happen in a year, it didn't happen in 5 years. It was years of systematic organizing of DSA using accumulated knowledge and experience to pull together all the elements to set things in motion that allowed the campaign to take off the way it did. When I started canvassing, they had maybe been canvassing for a few weeks, but there were a lot of systems in place. And you could see, so for example, like the communication between field leads that were like leading the canvasses and the canvassers, us. Everybody was invited to come into, or not just invited, but like requested to come into a WhatsApp chat. So there was like systems of communication built in that people who had been doing this for years in multiple different kinds of campaigns understood you need these kinds of levels of infrastructure.
Mm.
There needs to be infrastructure where people can communicate. Then there were offshoots, okay? And it was like offshoots that might seem like casual or informal, but I tell you there was so much like experience and thought put into what seemed informal. So for example, you have these like WhatsApp groups that got bigger and bigger and bigger because more and more and more people were signing up to Canvas and showing up, and then once you showed up, you got into this WhatsApp chat. But then people wanted, so in these WhatsApp chats, it was very specific to like, you're canvassing this neighborhood. This is my Clinton Hill WhatsApp chat. This is my Bed-Stuy WhatsApp chat. This is my Prospect Heights WhatsApp chat, right? And what you were allowed, quote unquote, to talk about in those chats was the canvas. Where are, I finished my turf. Can I get new turf, like new doors to knock on? Where is the literature that I need to hand out for this area? But very specific to that canvas. But people inevitably wanted to talk about other things related to the campaign. And it was said to those people, you can't do that here. We can create another chat for you. So there was another chat that was created because it was understood people are so excited about this thing, or have questions, or want to like talk ideology, or want to understand elements of politics that they don't understand because they're being invited into this new space. So there's like, I ended up being in these chats called like gabbers and yappers, which is sort of like chatty, chatty, chatty people, for Zohran. And it was from like, posting Instagram posts about like memes and this and that, whatever. Like people just like pontificating or blah, blah, blah. But even those informal chats were organized. And there was administrators on those chats, and those administrators said, you can't talk shit about the Jews here or the Israel. It's like it was monitored, and it was disciplined. It was politically disciplined, and I loved that. It was informal, but it was politically disciplined, and it was people were clear. They were clear, and it was a space. This space continues. A space of like generosity and openness, but of discipline. And every step along the way seemed like that. There was strategy, clear tactics, clear thinking. And this has been built over years and years and years. No one just started a campaign, even though I showed up in February, this, like the thinking behind this was like an accumulation of decades of knowledge put into action. And with each thing, there was like there was a number of people thinking, okay, how do we turn this into a mechanism, a tool that is going to benefit the whole, the group, that's going to be disciplined, that's not going to get sloppy, and that is what I think ultimately, those kinds of, that level of detail, so many people working behind the scenes, wanting to like give their soul to this, that allowed it to really blossom. And I think that is transferable, but you have to understand that it's all of that stuff. It's not just what happened in the last, like, 9 months to get us to a socialist win. It's like the 11 candidates that Lala was talking about that were, that have gotten into elected office because of the work that people have done on the ground for so many years, and what they've learned from that and made decisions not to make the same mistakes, how to build on the things that worked. Um, Very exciting.
Yeah, it's pretty inspiring to hear this. So let's talk about Gaza. Um, Mandami spoke out very clearly against the genocide in Gaza. What I want to know is how important was this stance in the election campaign. After all, it was for mayor, and foreign policy issues usually play a subordinate role in such races. What do you think? How important was this issue?
Yeah, it's extremely important to him personally, and he didn't shy away from making it a one of the tenets of his speeches. As I said, he was laser focused on affordability, and I think that's why a lot of people who um, maybe didn't even agree with him on his reading of the genocide still voted for him, because whenever he was asked about Israel during the debates, he said, I'm the mayor of New York City and I'm going to focus on making it a city for all, for everybody to be safe, for Muslims, Christians, Jews, every single New Yorker to consider this home. When he was asked if his first trip would be to Israel abroad, he said, I don't plan on traveling. I'm the mayor of New York City. I'm going to focus on making it affordable. And it was almost comical how much they wanted him to talk about Israel and, force him into this is what you do when you run on the Democrat Party line. Like, you have to prioritize Israel. And he was very clear that he just didn't have any interest in following that unwritten rule, and that he was going to stay clear or true to his principles. And from like, he is a uh, Ugandan-born, New York City raised son of two leftist, anti-colonial, you know, academics and filmmakers. He like during his childhood and teenage years, talks about how Palestine played a big role in his politicization and in his view of the world and colonialism. And he was clear that he wasn't going to betray that while running for mayor. And he also read the room. And the room is that the majority of New York City residents want an immediate end to the genocide, and for the billions of dollars sent to Israel for genocide to be spent rather in making New York City affordable. And so he was able to tie those two things. And I think that really spoke to people. It's also a generational issue. Again, people under 30 overwhelmingly consider themselves anti-Zionist in New York City. And the same is for the young Jewish population and for the Democratic Party base across all sort of sectors of demographics that you see, whether it's party, age, race, borough, there's an overwhelming support for ending the genocide. And it's so tragic and infuriating that the Democratic Party is prioritizing essentially economic interest groups. And I include in that CUFI, which is the Christians United for Israel. The largest group of Zionists in the United States is actually not the Jewish community, but the Christian community. But I say that because Zionism does have a very strong grip over the Democratic Party, and they actually are betraying their base. And so Zohran not only was not going to betray his principles, but also, again, read the room and knew that he was going to have support, and he did. And a really big demographic and organizing project that came out, one of the first organizations was Jewish Voice for Peace, JVP NYC, which is a powerhouse of organizing. They have led more direct actions than any group in New York City at a mass scale. It was JVP has also prioritized doing direct actions that say not in our name, but that are led by also Palestinians. And so it's a combination of allowing the Palestinian community in New York City to lead, but putting their bodies on the line, putting Jewish Voice for Peace's members' bodies on the line and saying not in our name, and we are proud anti-Zionists, etc. And so that has been a very close relationship between New Yorkers and the Zohran campaign. And there's thousands, or I would say maybe hundreds of different groups, just like Irene was saying about WhatsApp, Instagram, that are different, like gay Jews for Zohran, or like Brooklyn Jews for Zohran, or whatever, all kinds of variations. Union Jews for Zohran.
Hot
And
girls for
I
Zoran.
had, sorry?
Hot girls for Zoran.
Oh yeah, and then beyond the Jewish community, all sorts of minute communities, and finding their resonance with Zoran's messages. And when one of the things that Zohran did when he was assembly member was, as I previously mentioned, run a hunger strike for in solidarity with taxi drivers and the taxi drivers union protesting crippling debt. And that was a very successful experience. And so at some point he said, we need to do a hunger strike in front of the White House to call for an end to the genocide. And he did that. He once again put his body on the line. It's not just rhetoric. And I think that was, one of the actions he was running for. He was a candidate. He was running for mayor, and he was in his messaging making that connection between, we cannot have our taxpayer dollars be funding this genocide, and that's why we're also going to run a campaign called Not on Our Dime, which seeks to remove nonprofit status, like as in reduces taxpayer contributions, or nonprofit registered organizations that are Zionists that send money to Israel and like actively to settler projects. And so he was going to propose to regulate that, to put it into the legislation, the Not on Our Dime legislation, to really stop the flow of taxpayer dollars to funding the genocide, but through many, many other ways, sort of making the connection between the fact that 1 in 7 public school children are homeless and the insane amount of money that is sent to Israel. And I think, yeah, that's what ended up resonating with people. And also, this last thing, just as the first Muslim mayor in New York City, he lived and he saw his comrades and neighbors live through one of the most violent periods of New York City, with the NYPD actively surveilling Muslims and religious members of his community, and the fact that he was so proudly Muslim and willing to speak to how that politicized him, and to say, like safety for New Yorkers cannot be limited to just this one talking point about safety for Jewish Americans, or Jewish New Yorkers. Of course, he identified anti-Semitism as an issue, but he was willing to speak and frontline his experiences as a Muslim New Yorker and really sort of break a taboo around that did exist post 2000 or not post 9/11. And so I think that also really resonated with people, just being able to speak from that experience of being politicized as a Muslim, as a young Muslim person in New York City during that era.
Okay, let's go further maybe to the rich citizens of New York. How did the wealthy citizens react to Mamdani's election victory?
I don't actually know how they reacted. I mean, I think there was definitely, I don't know what, I read an article somewhere about a lot of wealthy New Yorkers seeking advice on tax loops or moving out or having a second residency or whatever, those kinds of things to avoid the or in their fear of being taxed more heavily, what to do about that. And in the article that I was reading, it pointed to the fact that it's a big hassle to try and avoid paying taxes by doing these other things like getting a second residency or whatever, all the things. And so, like, I don't know if this is the reason why, but as far as I can tell, there isn't some mass exodus of the wealthy out of New York City. I think that was, like a trend that people like to, or like a flame people like to fan to incite resistance or opposition to Mamdani being elected. But I don't actually think that's happening. But then again, I haven't been paying attention very closely to the rich's response. So maybe Lala has more to say about that. Oh, but I do want to say this one thing. Because he had such a phenomenal social media campaign and presence. Um, the campaign was filled with like joy and fun and like joke, like funny things that were um like such a bright spot in like campaigns that can feel heavy and like competitive, and there was so much sort of like a sense of camaraderie. But I just bring that up because there was one Instagram post of this guy, and he was like walking through New York City, and he's like, I am a billionaire. I love this city. My grandkids are going to grow up here. Why would I not want Zohran Mamdani to win? I want a better New York for everybody. My grandkids are going to thrive. And I'm a billionaire. Who cares if I pay more taxes? I need to pay more taxes so my grandkids and everybody else who live in the city that I love will get a chance to stay in the city. He was like, yes. And so I don't know if there were others, if they were like building a billionaires movement for Mamdani or whatever, but um, I thought it was a great post.
Yeah.
And I don't
And
know if it was a billionaire that people are familiar with. I didn't even know who he was. So, anyways, I just thought that was um, a great counterpoint, and maybe there are others like that. Yeah. I mean, I'll just say I'm a homeowner and I'm a landlord, and you know, I got my whole house to petition for him. You know what I mean? And there were many landlords like that own homes that, not you know, like multi-billion dollar, many, many buildings, but like many, many homeowners that I canvassed were and had tenants. They were very pro Mamdani. So, I mean, whatever. We're like small time, petty bourgeois.
if we look to the ordinary people, what would you say? What can ordinary people expect from the new mayor, Mamdani?
I think, I might be, whatever. My interaction with humans is a small slice of life in New York City, but I think so many people know who he is, and just that has, I feel like there's a tone that's just different. I'm in this
Mm.
space where uh, one of the spaces that I'm in is a it's a space for young people who are undocumented. They're unaccompanied minors that came into this country, don't have guardians, and there is legislation where they can, um, if they get guardianship, if they get a guardian, they can fast track a visa application for this particular age group. It's like 18 through 21, and then fast track a green card. And on this chat that we're in, and it's sort of like a grassroots space that evolved, particularly under Trump and the violence against um, migrants. And yeah, I mean that's existed for before Trump, but sort of the visibility of ICE and everything. Anyways, all this to say that, like, in that chat there are people who have been posting things that Mamdani has said in his inauguration speech, which is welcoming immigrants. Um, he took he put his body on the line to like challenge ICE. He, it's like there's a mayor who's actually visibly fighting against this destructive force that the federal government has put in to, remove New Yorkers. It's not just like we're a sanctuary city. It's like he's actively doing things, and he is in his talks, really trying to communicate a space of welcome. And I think, as an ordinary New Yorker, if you're like a young person who's like, hasn't gone to school and is like, hustling through, as a delivery person on Uber Eats, and might not be connected to like various infrastructure, like sort of formal infrastructure of the city. You're in this chat because you're part of this like community, and you hear the mayor of New York welcoming, I think that can make an impact, and that's like one tiny little example, but I think there's like threads of that throughout the city, and I think there will be a culture shift in New York over time because of his leadership. And I'm not saying that everybody, even in like the social justice spaces, are necessarily happy with each decision he's been making or whatever. I have friends that have been leading the racial justice, anti-police violence work in New York City for decades, and they were like, why did he keep the New York City police commissioner? But also they understand that there's political calculations he needs to make because of um, all of the many, um, all of the many places of opposition he's like confronted with. He's making like they're trying to make thoughtful decisions at each moment, and they recognize that, and they're not like embracing his decision, but also he's making these like nuanced decisions, like so he kept the police commissioner, which they weren't super happy about, but the police commissioner has always met with the mayor of New York on a day-to-day basis every day when they're in office to like discuss what I guess the safety slash policing issues are. And he, instead of having the police commissioner directly report to him, is having her report to the deputy mayor, which is different from traditional how it's been done traditionally in the administrations. And what this means is there's the potential. Well, first of all, his deputy mayor is a longtime politician in New York City. He's older. He worked under De Blasio and has worked, under different administrations. So he's very, I think, like familiar with the operations of
Mhm.
the city, and has a fair amount of like accumulated experience. But it means that both the deputy mayor and the mayor can come in and put pressure on the police commissioner in a way that if you're just meeting one on one with the police commissioner, it's just the mayor and you have the mayor's ear. But this is like a different, it puts the police commissioner in a kind of a slightly different power dynamic. And I think that's a very strategic move. I mean, I haven't talked to my friends in the like, safety slash, um, anti-police brutality spaces about that decision, but like these are very nuanced decisions that's not going to get covered in mass media, but I think make a difference in understanding both how power dynamics work, but also in making strategic decisions on how you uh, create the infrastructure that shapes the city.
Okay, then I have a big last question. Um, what would you say? What does this victory say about the mood in the United States? Are there any signs that the far right can be pushed back? Is the victory of Mamdani something like a sign that the left can overcome the far right tendencies in the USA?
Yeah, I think the main thing it shows is that at least in like Democrat voters, that they are extremely frustrated. We are extremely frustrated with the spinelessness of the Democratic Party establishment, in just the absolute absence of pushing back on the Trump administration's attacks on every single right that we have conquered, in working class history. From union rights to healthcare to even just how history is told, removing references to slavery and calling it some sort of labor, like unpaid laborers, like just really the erasure of history and the victories of the civil rights movement, etc. And so I think people in around the world, and it includes in the United States, do want um, anti-establishment candidates because the establishment has failed so many working class voters. Um, but the type of anti-establishment, um, program that people are hungry for are ones that better their material quality of life and the quality and dignity of their communities. And so I think the MAGA movement tried to speak to affordability by centering, onshoring, like the need to onshore and bring back Made in America and bring back factories and, beat China in the international market and have like a return to uh, a pride in what it means to be a white American and stuff like that. I think they tried to speak to part of the affordability and part of the community. And what the left has to offer is really that actually our definition of community spans so much broader. We defend a dignity that is actually representative of the working class, and critically, that doesn't push anyone under the bus. So and that responds to affordability in a way that, for example, doesn't just defend jobs in the United States for the sake of a job, but rather like, stands with unions, with labor protections, with taking corporate abuse to the courts, to the picket lines, fighting back, and really bringing class struggle back to U.S. politics in what is a time-honored tradition in the U.S. left and in American history in general. And so harking back to those, the 1930s socialists and taking pride in that U.S. history and in aspects of the New Deal that centered community. And I think it's not a coincidence that Zohran's inaugural speech really focused on distancing from the rugged individualism and embracing the warmth of collectivism. And you had some Fox News right-wing news anchors or political commentators say, we're Americans, we don't do that shit, speaking to the warmth of collectivism. And actually, I think that marks the difference between where the right is at and where the left is at. That I think most Americans do want the warmth of collectivism. I think most Americans, whatever their political affiliations, want a, to have their community celebrated, their needs met, their public schools well funded, their parents and children in robust healthcare systems. And I think it's very few that don't, and that's the politics that Zohran speaks to. I think we have to deliver. And a lot of us say that the work really began on January 1st, 2026, because we have to deliver the campaign promises of freezing the rent, making buses fast and free, and delivering universal childcare. We have to show and demonstrate, not just through a beautiful campaign, but through actual, governance competency, that we can make people's lives better. And I think among many, many, many other things, that requires the left getting very serious about fiscal policy, because that's where the right wing and the 1% and the 0.01% have a stronghold on US politics. They can, sacrifice, a few $1,000 million if it's going to help strangle New York City. And what we need to do is have rank and file social movements, unions, organizations that are willing to step up when those threats come, because they will come. Some millionaires want to be taxed more. That's fantastic. But a lot of the billionaires, and we almost have the world's first trillionaire, Elon Musk, who hates everything that this project stands for. And so, of course, they are going to try to punish this project. There are so many campaigns being run across the United States that are trying to put the lessons of the Zohran administration into their campaigns. So it's not just the United States eyes on this mayoral administration. It's the world. It's, as you were saying, right now I'm in Colombia. There's a lot of, what can our presidential elections in 2026 learn from Zohran? There's a lot of these questions. And so the United States elite knows that they have to squash this project. And that's where the importance of our working class organized movements come into play. We have to be able to step up. We have to be able to fill the gaps where there are punishments. We have to be able to respond, be resilient. And again, I want to reiterate, know a lot about fiscal policy and tax systems, and knowing how to navigate that world, because it's where we are the weakest. And then I think just the last thing is that for a while, I think New York City politics has been shifting the political imaginary of what is possible. And the Zohran administration, as the first South Asian, first Muslim, youngest, Democratic Socialist mayoral or mayor victory, I think it once again it puts it. I think the risk is that we're playing with people's trust and with people's hope, and we have to treat that as very sacred. And for example, a lot of low-income residents in New York City, a lot of low-income voters, did not vote for Zohran Mamdani in the primaries, because we are so scared to rock the boat. If you are on a minimum wage, if you are just making it by paycheck to paycheck, it's really scary to rock the boat. It's really scary to receive, Trump federal threats that they're going to defund critical systems that hold your life together. And so when we saw that those voters, low-income voters in New York, in the general election did I think it was an 18 percentage point difference, vote for Zohran, because they were bargaining. They were, they were, what's the word? They were willing to have hope. I think that's what we have to protect with our whole with our whole hearts, with our whole bodies, because if we are able to deliver and feed people's hope and show that ambition and diversity and inclusion and, you know, abundance is possible, then really, if we can do it in New York City, we can do it anywhere.
Thank you so much for this inspiring discussion, for this inspiring interview. I learned a lot of, and I would say let's stay in contact and let's stay let's exchange more about our experiences, your experiences in New York and Colombia, or and our experiences in Germany. I think we have the same goal to change the world with the perspective of the working class people. With the working class people on our side, because we are working class people. Let's change the world, and therefore let's stay in contact. Thank you so much for this inspiring discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, comrade.
Will
Will
do.
do.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, comrade.
Bye bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye.